Wants to throw, going left. Now he did drop the ball. Aggies have got it. And it's a touchdown. Michael Clemens.
It's one of those RPOs to the outside. Peavy's waiting for him, and I think he dropped it before he even got hit. So he dropped the flea flicker, and I think he...
Great run by Earl Campbell. And look, they give it right back to him, and there he goes. For him, he's going to his third now. That kick was blocked by McGurry of Denver City, Max McGurry. But this run made the 6 points.
He just ricochets through.
And welcome everyone to Lone Star Yell Fight, where we're talking all things college football, Texas Aggies, Texas Longhorns, from the greatest country in these United States. Time of the week, we have college football rocking and rolling. College football is back. Andy is back as well. Andy, first of all, we talked before about you would only feel better about A&M's game last week if they pasted whatever directional school they played. I can't remember. I mean, it was a pretty big win, right? 30-3, and they took the pedal off the foot off the pedal. What do you think?
So there's two sides to this, I guess. So let me not choke on my words here. There's one side that knows that we should beat a school like New Mexico State, even though they are a Division I school in an actual conference who have been Division I for a while. You should beat that team by 70 points. That's a thing that should happen. And so 50 plus is what I would have liked to see.
Okay.
Having said that, not my choice to take the foot off the pedal, so to speak. And Elko clearly did that. They got a lot less aggressive in their play calling. I think what I saw in the first half looked good. And really it was the first quarter that they were firing on all cylinders. They were doing the things they had to do. But the one running back we have left literally got, I think, 5 carries, was gone by the middle of the first quarter after he we for 71 yards and a touchdown. He got that run. He got his touchdown. They basically pulled him out of the game, and we were running walk-ons. We were running E.J. Smith and a walk-on the rest of the game.
Yeah.
I get it. I understand it. There's no point in risking injury. But at some point, what I would like to see different from an A&M program is that your second and third string comes in and beats the guys just as well as the first string was doing. And that's something that we haven't seen, 6-7 years, maybe longer than that, probably going back into the Sumlin era, of just being able to dominate with your entire roster. And I don't know if that is just endemic of how you build rosters these days, the lack of continuity, the amount of transfers that come onto your team every year, that you just can't build that depth. And I'm probably glorifying things from my college days, but you could beat a team like this and be up by 50 and put your third string guys in and your fourth string guys in, and they would actually play better than your first string guys.
Yeah.
And it's, you don't get that much anymore. And I see other teams, have similar coaching philosophies. And I do understand logically, there's no point in risking your starting quarterback. There's no point in risking your starting running back. There's no point in not playing your younger guys, but I'd like to see more production from younger guys in these kind of situations. Having said that, you got out with a win. Nobody got hurt. That at the end of the day, that's what it is.
There's been a lot of criticism over Texas beating Arkansas by double digits on the road. They were 14-point favorites. They won by 10. What I'm finding interesting, and it's going to go into our next conversation about Quinn Ewers, is there's a lot of criticism to the offense, but for whatever reason, Sark went in with a very conservative game plan. It was one of the only games where they ran it as many times as they threw it. And it almost looked like he was intentionally just trying to grind clock and get the game over as quickly as possible. And I don't understand why pundits who want to criticize the output without looking at the game plan. I mean, I want to say that there were at least 3-4 series in a row where it literally was run, pass, and that was your play progression. Very few passes on first downs. Sark had said he wanted to reestablish the running game. I'm not sure that he did, but it does seem that like a little bit of a lot of criticism without having actually seen the game.
Yeah, and I think unfortunately a lot of the people complaining look at the box score or see the highlights, and that's the extent of their analysis as well. There weren't a lot of highlights, so it must not have been a good game, or it was only a 10-point win against Arkansas. It must not have been a good game. And the reality is that Arkansas does have a good defense, so that did help with the ineffectiveness of the running game. But I don't think Sark's wrong. You do need to establish the running game, because maybe not against Kentucky this week, but certainly against A&M, certainly against whoever you might play after that, whether it's the SEC championship or the playoffs, you're going to have to run the football. And it felt like in the last few weeks that Texas has gotten away from that a little bit. There's been injuries that have had things to do with that. I think some of that, as I've stated before, is Stark's own stubbornness with maintaining some sort of balance or wanting to throw the ball when it's just absolutely not necessary to throw the ball. Mm-hmm. But at some point, I think that's a point in his favor that he is, acknowledging at least that this is an area that we need to get better at, because it's going to help us as the season goes on. And to that point, Arkansas has a good run defense. That their defensive line isn't, a mid-tier Big 12 level type defense that you could just run all over when you felt like it. So there were things to work on. There were things for your offensive line to get better at. Did Texas make it closer, or who do you want to give credit to? Did Arkansas make it closer than it could have been? Because at one point it was a 3-point game in the late third quarter, early fourth quarter. But I think had Texas decided they wanted to throw the ball around the field in that fourth quarter, because y'all were driving up and down the field, you just didn't score. I think that it easily could have been a 3-4 possession game. I just don't think that was I think for whatever reason, Sark decided to emphasize these other things, feeling very confident that his defense and running game could continue maintaining that lead. It's kind of an exercise in not only winning the game that week, but also how do I prepare for the rest of the season? And I think that's more of what you saw. Unfortunately for you, your fans and some of the people who cover your team and some of the national writers pay only the surface level of attention and get really pissy when your quarterback's not throwing for 400 yards and your running backs don't have 200 yards and you didn't win by 50.
Yeah, to your point, when Arkansas went closer to with only 3, the next position they opened the offense up. I think they went 85 yards in 6 plays to score a touchdown. And I do think that was I think it was definitely Texas's mission, particularly knowing that Arkansas has a great run defense and just a miserable pass defense, to the point that they think they were starting all walk-ons this last game because they just needed something. So I kind of appreciate it. Obviously, if you lose the game, you look stupid doing it, but you didn't. So,
but I don't think that was ever in danger from where I saw it watching that second half. I don't think it was ever. There was a point where it was close. Certainly 3 points is close that late in the game, but it always felt like, okay, well, if Texas decides to win this game, they're going to. So there were things you could certainly start doing to negate whatever Arkansas was doing, but Sark chose to work on some things against a decent defense opponent, and I think that will benefit your team in the next few weeks.
Yeah, here's hoping, but it does buy into a national narrative. Well, it started out as a Longhorn Twitter narrative that has now become a national narrative, and that is on the effectiveness and the ability of Quinn Ewers. Now, we were talking about this a little bit last night before our show, that statistically, you can make the argument that Quinn Ewers is probably the 4th or 5th best quarterback in program history, right? You clearly have Vince, you clearly have Colt, you clearly have James Street, and then you can get into conversations about everybody loved Major, but was really, and then Chris Sims and all of that. Yet he's always been seen as the stopgap and the filler. And now that there are now what we saw coming from a really unreputable website that has now spread to more reputable news sources, that it is unclear whether Quinn intends to declare for the draft. I think some of that's trying to read into what he said. I think he's going to declare, but what happens at quarterback? So from an outside looking in, what do you think of this whole scandal? Or is it a scandal? And the other part of it is there's zero chance he's the starting quarterback at Texas next year. He either goes to the draft or he transfers, right?
I mean, it's a more than zero chance, but it's not in double digits, in my opinion. I think this is unfortunately the nature of who Sark has recruited to be the backup quarterback, and the anticipation of that last name being fulfilling the legacy of the other three quarterbacks in his family. And I think Ewers has been the unfair recipient of a lot of negative attention because of that. And Ewers has brought some of this on himself. And I'm not begrudging his choice, but he chose Ohio State out of high school and then transferred to Texas. So there was always some sort of, you didn't choose us first. We're glad you're here, but I don't know how much your heart's into it. And I don't know how much we're going to be into you. And then almost
even though he didn't want to choose Herman, which we both understand, but you're right. That's the narrative. You pick someone else first.
You mean the currently unemployed head coach, Tom Herman?
I think he's actually become the third host on this show. You know, if
I don't know that we can afford the amphetamine and Red Bull budget for him.
So. Probably right. Plus his wife would want to come too. And she's not really good on the radio.
Yeah. So you've got the situation with Arch Manning waiting in the wings and a fan base that is anxiously awaiting that era to officially start. Yeah. In the meantime, I think it's one of these situations where your fan base doesn't appreciate what they have while they have it, because I think what's going to happen, and I think the plan all along, is that Ewers was going to declare for the draft after this year. I don't know that the season for him personally has gone as well as he would have liked. By no means do I think he's had a bad season. Yeah. And I think he will get drafted if he declares for the draft. But I also see a situation where he might just be tired of being told how bad he is and how much people want to get rid of him and move on to the next program if he doesn't go to the draft. And the transfer portal makes that very easy. And there are, if you want to know how good Quinn Ewers is, and there's 130 some odd Division I teams, there's probably 100 teams that would gladly take his transfer.
Mm-hmm. And big teams, not the not SMU, like where Garrett Gilbert went, right? Like Ohio State might take him back, kind of deal.
I don't know. SMU might win the ACC championship this year because college football doesn't make sense anymore, Jim.
Right. There's also the issue, though, the quarterback at A&M, Connor Wigman, probably gets a little bit more clear cut. Connor Wigman has much more of a career left. Do you see him transferring at the end of this year?
Yeah, I think that is the commonly held perception about what's going to happen. And he could surprise people. He was a 5-star quarterback in the same class, or I always get confused with this because Quinn Ewers declared early, so he basically stopped playing his senior season so he could start in January, if I recall right. He graduated early basically from high school, so he could go.
So he was retrograde to the class before him. So think how that worked.
So I think had he stayed in his regular class, he would have been in the class with Cade Klubnik and Connor Wigman. And so those were three, competing quarterbacks in Texas that were of kind of equal stature in the state. So having said all that, Wegman's career has not gone the way it should have, which is the story, honestly, of most college athletes. Very few of them live up to the hype that you want them to live up to. Injuries have had a part of that. For me, I don't know if it's the system or the mental part of his game or both right now, but he's clearly not comfortable. He lost his job during the year to Marcel Reed. And even when he got in the third quarter last Saturday night, drove the team down the field, then immediately threw an interception in the end zone for no apparent reason, because there's no reason to throw that ball, but he did. And it's almost like the hits that he's taken has sped up his clock so much that he can't go through his progression. So he either locks on a receiver regardless of what's going on around him, or he can't see anybody. But he's hesitant to take off and run, which is a thing he can do. So it's kind of this weird situation where there's all the talent in the world, but something is just not right. I tend to think it's more the system that Colin Klein has that's gonna basically respect the skills and utilize the skills more of a Marcel Reed type, who is willing to tuck it and run, who is willing to pull the ball and master that RPO game. versus what Connor Wegman should do. And he would, is a true classic drop back quarterback who happened to be able to scramble. And I think that's the difference. So for him, I don't see a world where he is at A&M next year. And I think
unless
the thing is,
crazy happens in the next 2 plus the bowl game or the playoffs. Right?
I mean, there's always a possibility, but I think the reality is that he needs to go someplace and have a make it year so he has a chance to have an NFL career, because he has that kind of arm talent. He was a guy that a lot of people were predicting to be one of the top 3 or 4 quarterbacks in the SEC this year. And unfortunately, that just didn't work out. He missed some games because of injury, but when he was healthy, it didn't look great outside of one game against Missouri. And some team
where, ironically enough, he did run a lot in that game as well.
Exactly. So there are books. I think the difference between the Ewers situation and the Wegman situation is that, and there are trolls on both sides, is the consensus is that Ewers isn't going to be back because he's going to go to the NFL, and we're fine because we've got Arch Manning waiting in the wings. It's Arch Manning's time. And there's a lot of regret on the side of A&M outside of the Twitter trolls and the internet trolls whoever the backup quarterback is going to be great with Wegman, because Wegman was bought into the program. Wegman stayed through a coaching change. Wegman says the right things, even though he's kind of a doofus. The way he says it isn't great, but he says the right things, and he's a team guy, and you can see it on the sidelines even now. Clearly, he's not happy with his situation. But every time they flash to the sideline and Marcel Reed's being talked to, Connor Wegman is right there helping him, telling him what he's seeing from the sidelines. He's a team guy. And so it'll be not a great day when Connor Wegman makes that announcement that he's going to be pursuing other opportunities. But I think everybody fully expects that to happen. And it's, there's some regret there.
It's funny to me because, you and I, we do an Astro show as well. And we're always talking about how there's a sort of media / fan perception versus what probably the reality is. It sucks even more for a guy like Connor Wegman because he's a kid and he does seem to be doing things the right way. He seems to be being more mature than, frankly, Aaron Rodgers would not be handling this situation as well as I think Connor Wegman's doing, but yet he's going to get saddled with whatever narrative fits Twitter and fits the media.
Yeah, and
which is basically Twitter, right? That is the media.
Yeah, but that's and right now that we've anointed Marcel Reed to be the next big thing up until next season, when we have somebody else standing there who's the backup who had a good series, and all of a sudden you want Marcel Reed's going to struggle at some point, and whoever the backup is going to be the most popular guy on the team. It's a tale as old as football. I guess the good news there is that because Marcel Reed's played well and he's a redshirt freshman, is that we lost a 5-star quarterback this last week who would have caused a distraction. I don't know what's going. I'm sure we'll try to pick up another quarterback either through the portal or through the high school class. But it's this never-ending story until you. And honestly, we bring it on ourselves. Until you start winning championships and winning games you should have, there will be constantly people second guessing. The amount of money that's in college football, especially with how open it is now, I think has given fans or a certain type of fan this carte blanche to criticize what are basically 18 to 21-year-olds. Because they earn money, so I can talk bad about them now, and I miss that.
They were doing that before they earned money too. Let's be frank.
I know they were, but I think it's more prevalent now, or at least it feels that way, because I still lean on this idea, or at least I did, that these are guys who chose to play for my school. They're kids, and when they were amateur-ish, you can criticize the play, but when it became personal, that's where you cross the line. That line is completely gone, and somehow it's justified because, there's money involved now. So
yeah,
it's the same way that you can, if I went on Texags right now and said, hey, you know what? I think Jimbo got a raw deal. I agree he should have gone, but fan base was hard on him. Immediately you'll have, he has $70 million he can cry into, and somehow that makes it better. If you have money, you don't have emotions or problems or anything else. And these kids are the same way, and they don't have $70 million. I don't care
Yeah,
what.
like I think Ewers is $1.5 million, and he's one of the top ends of this NIL thing.
Yeah, and most of these guys are in the 5 digits of NIL
Right.
money. I mean, you're crying yourself into $20,000. It's not quite the same level of pillow.
So they can buy themselves a Hyundai and take their girl for an actual dinner. That's
Yeah,
basically
it's
the
a
amount of money.
Serta. It's a Serta pillow. It's not one of the nice ones though.
That's right.
It doesn't cool automatically, and you have to flip
Yeah.
it over to get the good side.
Totally. Hey, I want to go back to one more question about Sark and the quarterback situation. Then I want to talk A&M and I want to talk Ohio State. But it does seem to me if Sark could fall into a Mac Brown trap here, where if for some reason the less than 1% thing happens where Ewers stays and he's the starting quarterback at Texas, it does send a weird message to all the other recruits that Texas has lined up behind Arch Manning that you can't necessarily trust what you're being told by the coaching staff. You think that's an actual thing you have to think about?
I think you have to think about it, but I think part of being a head coach and part of being part of that recruiting staff, so it's not just on Sark, it's the recruiting coordinator, it's all of the area recruiters, the position coaches, all of that, is there's a way to manage that, but you communicate it ahead of time. And I think most kids, there would certainly be fallout in that situation, but I think most kids, if you were honest with them and said, look, our situation has changed, doesn't change how we feel about you. It's not really going to affect your ramp time because you were probably going to redshirt this year anyway. But in the instance of a quarterback recruit, for instance, but there's a possibility that Quinn Ewers is back and he might start some games. This is his last year, one way or the other. But I think the key to that is Sark being in front of it with those recruits and explaining, because kids understand situations change. These kids have played high school football. They understand that positions are, open weekly in general. Maybe not for them, but they've seen it at least with their teammates. And so it's a situation where you can manage it if you make the effort to manage it. I've seen plenty. Kevin Sumlin is famous for not managing it, not talking to recruits or, even players on his own roster in the quarterback room. And so you have Kyler Murray and the other one, Allen, leave within a week of each other because why bother to talk to the guys? They'll just figure it out on their own.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think
to answer your question, yes, it can be managed, but it's something that you actually have to actively do. And I would imagine the infrastructure around the Texas program has guys that make those touches.
I would hope so. And I do think I do think there's a universe where I don't think there's a universe where both Manning and Ewers are on the team next year together.
I mean, there's probably one, and I'm sure Marvel has messed it up in a movie or adaptation somehow.
I got to rewatch Deadpool to see if that flew out. All right, real quick, let's go to Texas A&M and Auburn. Auburn's 2.5-point favorites. They are a favorite on the road, which hasn't been kind of the thing that's happened with A&M recently. How are you feeling about the game? Is it a trap game for A&M? Do you think Auburn's actually worth being that close to A&M as far as the line goes?
Well, I think playing at Jordan-Hare is a big part of that line. So that's 3 of the points right there on a neutral field. I assume they'd be closer to like 4.5. It's still a possession game. And the thing with Auburn, there's kind of 2 things. The thing with Auburn is they've got plenty of talent. They haven't exactly been blown out of games. They've been close. They just consistently, as we've used on this show, stepped on their own dicks so many times. They have decent stats until you get to the red zone. And inside the 20, I think they're the worst team or the second worst team, I think I read, in the SEC as far as actually scoring points. Not just touchdowns, but just points. So something always happens to them, and it's usually self-inflicted kind of stuff. The other side of that line is A&M and our recent history in road games. And honestly, until we win road games in hostile environments, we deserve whatever Vegas says we deserve. I'd love to prove them wrong. And there's some level of thought in my head, no matter, you asked if it's a trap game. It's not a trap game because we have, 12 years of history now with Auburn. And this has been a series where weird things have happened. The road game has won as much as road team has won as much as they lost over those 12 years. We've had some great moments in Jordan-Hare. We've had some bad moments in Jordan-Hare. But the interesting thing to me is this is kind of the watermark about whether or not I think this is a successful season for Mike Elko in his first year, because this is the kind of game that A&M would not win under Jimbo Fisher.
Right.
And it's the kind of game that Mike Elko needs to win. And if he does, everything else is gravy, because you can still go back and tell recruits that we're building towards this, and this is where we were, and we're this close, no matter what happens on the 30th, no matter what happens with a potential playoff seeding or an SEC championship. When you lose to Auburn, you've got to think the shine comes off a little bit, and that makes it harder, which is already going to be a difficult game in Kyle on the 30th against Texas.
Sure.
And then you're in a lower tier bowl game, because the only bowl games that are going to matter are now playoff games. That just makes the whole thing harder. You win at Auburn, you can put a lot of those things to bed that have been said about you over the last.
Yeah, you've already had a 9-win season, which is a great season.
Yeah, and then you can go into whatever happens left with the opportunity to win one more game out of 2, potentially 3 games. And if that happens, or even better, you beat Texas, you make the SEC championship, you get a playoff slot, you've got a lot of momentum to build from.
Yeah.
But for me, Auburn's the key. You're going to ask me in a week, has this been a good season for A&M? And if we win on Saturday, I'll be able to say yes. If we lose on Saturday, I'm going to have a real big problem saying yes.
Speaking of people who might be having a rough week next week, Paul Feinbaum is in risk of losing the rest of his hair. And I think that's going to have everything to do with the result of Indiana and Ohio State. Indiana is undefeated. They're 10-0. And while I understand the criticism that they haven't, quote, played anybody, they've actually dominated pretty much every game they've played. So I think that kind of erases some of that. Yet they are still 11-point dogs on the road to Ohio State. Does Indiana have a puncher's chance, in your opinion, of actually coming out of this game with a win and having this be a really transformative season for them? Or is Ohio State going to be back in the Big Ten championship like we all expect?
Does Indiana have a chance? Absolutely. They're a good team, and they play solid, well thought out fundamental football, and that will always give you a chance to win. They have a lot of momentum on their side. They have a coach who just re-upped for 8 years, although that means absolutely nothing other than a nice press clip, because all it takes is $1 more for most of these coaches with a bigger program, and they're out the door. But hey, it's a great story, and he's at least willing to give it a shot and earn a lot of money in the meantime. Ohio State under Ryan Day generally doesn't lose games unless you're talking about Michigan recently. It's in the horseshoe. Ohio State's a double-digit favorite. Ohio State's probably going to win that game. I mean, they out-talent Indiana at every position on the field.
And
Indiana's
twice, right?
Well, I mean, to Indiana's credit, what Indiana is going to do is play good, solid team football. It's a team concept. But at some point, this is one of those Jimmy and Joe's conversation. Ohio State is going to outclass them in almost every position. I don't know that they've faced a team, Indiana has faced a team yet that outclasses them at every position.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be the big difference, because Ohio State just recruits at a different level. This will be the biggest game that anybody on that Indiana sideline has ever played in their careers. Maybe they answer that bell. My guess is they probably don't. And Indiana's been a great story, and it should take nothing away from them, because most teams struggle going into Ohio State and winning a football game. But I just don't see that. I hope Indiana shocks the world. I just don't see it happening.
Let's say Indiana loses by 10, which is what people would expect. Do you think that takes them out of the playoffs?
Yes.
Or do you think they're still going to get it? So you think they have to basically win the Big Ten to make the playoffs?
I don't think it's fair, but I think they absolutely will tumble so far down the rankings that it won't even. It will be, and a lot of that depends on what else happens during the week, because there are other teams that could lose or win. But yeah, I don't think that the voters overall are going to respect Indiana with a loss. With a win, you can't deny them, but with a loss, you can. All of the things you just said about the weak schedule and they haven't played anybody yet, and this has all been a product of their opponents. That'll be right in the top of mind for voters, and especially the formula or committee or whatever we're calling it that's picking the playoff slots. They may last. They may last in the rankings. Let's say this: if Indiana loses, they'll probably be like 12, 13 in the rankings, but it won't survive another week.
Well, I, for one, am going to pick UMass over Georgia.
Sure, you can.
Yeah, why not? You know what? I think they can cover the 43.
I don't know. Does Carson Beck throw 3 interceptions, or does he actually play like a competent quarterback?
Yeah,
2 weeks.
And I do think they're overblowing how confident he looked last week. I mean, talk about narratives. He got a lot of help from a lot of skill positions in that particular game, and some help from the referees, which we're not used to.
Well, I think also Tennessee helped quite a bit within that game by getting really away from their offensive identity for some random reason.
Yeah, they definitely pissed down their leg, as we used to say back in the Army. All right, that does wrap us up for Lone Star Yell Fight. For Andy, I'm Jim. Now, Andy, we are going to be back before the November 30th game. I feel like it's going to be the most somber show we've done because neither of us seem very particularly excited about what we think the outcome of that game will be. As a little bit of a teaser to what's coming.
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, you guys have to survive former A&M head coach Mark Stoops and the Kentucky Wildcats coming into DKR this weekend. So good luck with that.
Yeah, right.
You know, the famous rivalry between Stoops and the Texas program is legendary, especially as the A&M head coach.
Yeah.
I don't think either of us are confident that our team is going to win. So we may be spending 30 minutes explaining why the other team is going to win the game.
Yeah. I think also too, it's going to be, I've already been so thankful that I'm not really on Twitter anymore. And I have a feeling that I'm going to be really thankful during that particular week and the successive games, the successive days after.
There's Twitter and Texags for me will be basically shut down probably today, because no matter how the Auburn game went, I mean, unless we go up 45-0, it'll be a cesspool. And if we lose this game, Texags will be nothing but suicidal tendencies and thoughts all the way up to the 30th. Well, not just how we lose, but how somehow the program will have to be shut down and just, put to sleep.
Well, here's hoping that doesn't happen. All right, again, for Andy, I'm Jim. We will see you next week. Until then, enjoy a weekend. Really not a lot of great games, but definitely Ohio State, Indiana should get everybody's attention. So until next week, hook 'em horns.
Gig 'em Aggies, and go watch Plane, Trains, and Automobiles. It's a great Thanksgiving movie.
And if you have it, go watch Dutch. It's the other great Thanksgiving movie. And if you don't have it, send you a copy of Turkey Day, which I think is the third best Thanksgiving movie.
At least third.
Congratulations. You made old man Saunders smile. That's not easy to do. You should go out and celebrate.
All my friends are 1,000 miles away. I don't have anyone to celebrate with.
I'm Tommy.
Andy.
You're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen.
Man, what a rush.
You're my soulmate.
Look who's here. I'm so glad to have my girls back home.
I filed for divorce.
You just got served, bro.
That's the best news I've heard all day, honey.
What are you doing here?
Look, I know about the Rugrat.
You can't say a word to them.
I won't, but I want to stay.
You're blackmailing me. I don't have anything to say to you.
You were never completely miserable. If it sucked as much as you think it did, I mean, you must be a masochist.
All right, Haas. I think it's time you mosey on down the road.
I think you should go.
What's for breakfast? I'm starved.
You're really trying to kill me this week, aren't you?
So, you're the loser that married Andy. Didn't even make sure her family could be there.
You know, family.
Looks like I'm challenging you for least popular person in the world.
Where's your mommy, Tommy?
Love is a long path.
Yeah, you sure you're not going to hurt yourself over there, Tommy? Be careful.
You could get a real nasty paper cut, you know. What are you, one of them sissy South Florida boys?
No, I'll be okay. Besides, I've lost my dignity, my feeling in my legs, and I'm at the fate of the free world, right?
I'd watch that.